the reason why you want to be a physician can sometimes be a red flag. And welcome to the Old Pre-Meds Podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week, where I take questions directly from you when you post in the non-traditional pre-med discussion over at premedforums.com. Today we have a great question about chronic illness and medical school. It's something that comes up a lot from you listeners. So hopefully this will help a lot of you. And if this is one of you, I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're thriving in your current situation. So our student today asks, U.S. applicant here, and I have had a chronic illness that spiked the summer before my undergrad. I have spent undergrad in and out of treatments and as a result have had many prescription meds with severe side effects. Currently, I'm doing much better than my earlier years of undergrad, and my GPA has had an overall upward trend. However, as you can imagine, my grades have not been the best as I have been preoccupied with other things. My major is international affairs and minor in English as I have many other interests and love diverging in the intersectionality of medicine and the other aspects of study relevant in this world. Politics in medicine. 2 questions. Do med schools have access to my medical records? If they do, will I then not have to explain much of why my grades are the way that they are? And 2, if they do not, should I write about my illness in my essays? It is a large part of why I want to be a doctor, as the death of my friend in treatment due to misdiagnosis has encouraged me to pursue a career that will help me be the doctor that we needed when I was in treatment. Not to diss on all doctors, just my personal experience. And I currently have the best doctor that is helping me. I was deterred from my medical pathway. I, quote, gave up on the sciences when I was in treatment, as telling from my major/minor originally, but I came back to it when I saw that there is a reason I went through what I went through. Side note, working with my physical therapist and recovering from my treatment, my chronic illness should not impede on my ability to be a physician in the future. Fingers crossed. Thank you for your help. It has been a long and difficult journey to get here, so any help would be greatly appreciated. All right. Again, very common question, unfortunately, when it comes to students applying to medical schools. And a lot of it comes back to what the student said in this second part of their question, that what they have been through is a large part of why they want to be a physician. Now, in my personal statement book, we talk about the seed. What was it that exposed you to medicine? And maybe this wasn't the specific exact seed for this student, but it's a huge part of why they want to be a physician. And so when we talk about red flags in an essay, the reason why you want to be a physician can sometimes be a red flag, right? If it's an illness, whether it's physical, mental, whatever, that may be a red flag to some admissions committees. And so on one hand, you're like, this is why I want to be a doctor. And on the other hand, you're like, and it may also hinder me through this process. If your records show that you had to take time off of undergrad, and now all of a sudden you're applying to medical school saying, I'm good to go, well, where is that connection? So when you, in your application, when you write your personal statement, when you have potentially other options in secondary essays, which it's very common to ask about any kind of gaps in your education, anything like that, you have the ability there to explain yourself. Let me answer the first question right off the bat. No, they do not have access to your medical records. Medical records are considered very private in our law. They're yours. You are not to give them to anyone. They shouldn't ask for them. They're yours. Don't worry about it. You can, I don't want to say you can hide behind them, but you can hide behind them. So don't worry about that part. The second part, should you disclose? I think you should disclose as much as necessary to explain why you want to be a physician. If you went through a personal experience and it has shaped who you are and formed this relationship with medicine for you that is obviously driving you to want to be a physician, then tell as much of that story as possible without drawing any sort of bad attention to yourself. You don't want the admissions committee, the person reading this, to go, okay, I see you went through this. Maybe it's under control, but I see you also had to miss school because of this. Is this going to be an issue when you get to medical school? You don't want to give any sort of look in your application that you are not going to be able to finish medical school in 4 years. That will draw some attention to your application that you may not want. With that said, you have to tell your story. And I think you should tell it as best as possible, as much information as you need to tell your story appropriately without going above and beyond. Again, don't draw too much attention to yourself that just isn't needed. Now, when you're looking at something like talking about, I want to be the doctor that we needed at that moment, don't talk about that kind of stuff. That sort of negativity is very common in essays, and all you're doing is pointing fingers, going, that doctor sucked and I'm going to be better. And that's just not necessary. There are obviously bad doctors, there are bad teachers, there are bad everything in this world, right? And so you pointing the finger saying, I want to be better than that person, isn't a strong personal statement. So avoid that sort of negativity. Talk about your journey. Talk about the impact that the physicians had on you, physicians had on your friend, how you want to have those types of impacts, and tell your story in that way. Reflect on it. Talk about why you want that impact on other people, and move on. That's how you tell your story in a personal statement that hopefully doesn't draw too much attention and too many questions as to whether or not you're going to be capable of finishing medical school. Remember, the goal of the admissions committee is a lot. They have lots of goals. They want students who are going to be a good community, right? Good community member. They're building a huge community, and they want a good community member. So number one, do you fit in with the rest of the class that they are building? Number two, they want to make sure that you're going to finish medical school in 4 years. If there are any sorts of deviations from that, they are evaluated on that standard. And so they want to make sure that you're doing right by them as well. They want to make sure, obviously, academically you can handle it, that you're academically capable of passing all of the tests. They are academically capable of passing the boards. They are academically capable, once you're in residency, of continuing to do well on your in-service exams and your boards after that. Medical schools are obviously worried about that. That's why there's a lot of focus on stats. And then on top of that, they want to make sure from a physical, mental health perspective that you are going to be okay. All of that taken into account, they will evaluate your application and go from there. So you don't want to draw any unnecessary questions, any unnecessary attention to your application outside of that. Hopefully that was helpful. If you are dealing with any sort of chronic illness, remember to tell your story as best as possible. If there's something in your story that maybe caused you to have some bad grades, you don't need to go super in depth. Maybe briefly mention something happened. But if it's something that really contributes to why you want to be a physician, then maybe you need to go a little bit more in depth. Again, hopefully that helped. If you have a question you want answered here on the podcast, go to premedforums.com, sign up for an account. It's free, and go ask your question there. That's where we pull questions for this podcast, for these YouTube videos. Have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the Old Premeds Podcast.